with no further ado, I would like to invite on the stage Lucy Yu and Grégoire. Microphones. Great. Thank you very much for being here, and welcome to be part of this panel to actually discuss from your role and from your perspective how we can address the energy transition. I would like to give the space to you to actually introduce who you are, what you do, what is the role in the organization, and how does your activities actually contribute to that. Lucy, maybe we can start from you.
So, I was going to ask if you could hear me, but I'm pretty sure you can. So my name is Lucy Yu. I run a not-for-profit research organisation called Centre for Net Zero, and our research focuses on delivering the future energy system. Now, my organisation is part of a larger commercial group of companies called the Octopus Energy Group, who have interests and activities right across the renewable energy sector. Our research, though, is really a program which is centered around field trials and experiments with Octopus Energy customers. So they are ordinary people, ordinary households, just like you and I. And we are principally interested in understanding their behaviors with low-carbon technologies. So when I talk about low-carbon technologies, I'm talking about things like electric vehicles, electric heat pumps, home solar. And why are we interested in that? Well, if we consider the major transformations that we'll see in the future energy system, these household residential transformations will play a huge part. We know if we look at global emissions that transport and heating are two sectors which are responsible for a very large amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. So across the group, we have millions of customers globally who are starting to adopt low-carbon technologies. And so we have lots of data about their behaviors. Some of this gives us insights that can help us encourage that adoption in the first place. So things like how to structure models of finance to help make those technologies more affordable. And some of it tells us how households are using those technologies when they have adopted them. And that's via smart meters, which record their energy consumption. And that information is very critical to help us design a future energy system that uses those technologies intelligently. So the field trials we're doing are trying to understand things like the potential to reduce or shift demand for energy. And this involves things like charging electric vehicles more intelligently, where we can change the charging profile of the vehicle to help keep the electricity grid in balance. And in the future, of course, many of you will know that energy won't just flow from the grid to the vehicle or to the local building, but it will be bi-directional, so it will also be able to potentially flow back again as well. We have a lot of data on these innovations and the potential to incentivize changes in consumer behaviors to help support the grid of the future and balance that grid on the demand side. We're also interested in innovative green finance models, so I alluded to that slightly earlier. We're interested in the potential of things like neighborhood financing models, longer payback periods for things like low-carbon technologies, and property-linked finance schemes. So how do we help households overcome the upfront costs of purchasing these technologies? I think we're moving from a period where we've been quite happy for early adopters who can afford to buy these technologies to adopt them, but we now need to get to a world where we also need those middle adopters to be able to afford and pay for these types of technologies. And just finally, in my opening comments, at the macro level, we're very interested in the types of cities that are attracting investment. We have a stream of work called Clean Energy Cities, and in that piece of work, we've looked at the highest impact and evidence-driven actions that city leaders can adopt to accelerate their local energy transition, and that is really based on the local characteristics of their cities. So, for example, if you're a city perhaps that has a very digitally native population with high rates of digitization, then perhaps one of the things you might focus on is encouraging more uptake of time of use tariffs to encourage people to use energy at times that benefit the grid. Whereas if you're a city maybe with high availability of land, which might be suitable for renewable energy developments, then it might be more appropriate to focus some of your early efforts on really stimulating more local generation projects in your city. And I can talk a little bit more about that in the conversation.
Sure, thank you so much. I think that you're doing so many things, and I don't know from where to start, but what I would like to highlight is that from the research perspective, like you see how many different actors are in place, either the individuals, the early adopters that give us at the moment the data that we're affording to actually implement this new models of energy production or consumption, but then, so how we could utilize this data to have a more massive implementation, but at the same time, how to help the policymakers or the finance authorities or institutions maybe to create a more sustainable way of adoption of greener energy transition. And then let's move to our next speaker, Grégoire.
Thank you, and I would add that with a researcher, policymaker, entrepreneur, you need a key player. And you mentioned, you highlighted, this is a financier, a bank to finance project and so on, and could make into action. I think it's important. And the bank I'm representing today is the European Investment Bank. It's important, particularly for such innovation, for such a project to finance, because we are committed to become, and actually we are, the EU Climate Bank. We are investing into projects that are fulfilling the objective of the European Union, particularly the Green New Deal, with large amounts. And just to provide you with some example, we are at some metrics. We are investing each year 70 billion, all in Europe, 90% in Europe and 10% outside the EU. And we have about 600 billion of assets in our portfolio. It means that the EIB is the most important public bank in the world, potentially bigger and bigger than the World Bank, but we are not known enough, and that's a pity. And I'm happy to be there also to promote the fact that the EIB is there to make into action our vision for the energy transition, for decarbonization, and so on, and all the aspects of the climate change. And let me just highlight the fact that it doesn't cost anything to the taxpayer. We are issuing bonds, and we pioneer the first green bond emission about 15 years ago. We are now supporting this market with entrepreneur, with enterprise, and also sovereign. And we are issuing 70 billion, and we are borrowing 70 billion. So it doesn't cost anything to the taxpayer, and it's important to highlight. Thanks to our AAA notation, we are issuing money, and it doesn't cost so much, and we are transferring this advantage, this competitive advantage, to the client. It means that we are in a capacity to support projects with a lower rate and with a long-term maturity. We consider ourselves as a long-term investor. And more than 4 years ago, we took important decision to switch our strategy into a new vision for what the objective of the European Union and to become the EU Climate Bank. We decided in 2019, with the support of all the member states, unanimously, and it's important to highlight it, we decided to exclude from our portfolio for our investment strategy all the projects which are using fossil fuel. Today, it looks normal, but 5 years ago, it wasn't the case, and the EIB was the first to do to take such a decision. We also decided to double our capacity of investment. We were dedicating, and it was our commitment in 2015 during the COP21 here in Paris, to dedicate 25% of our activity for projects with a positive impact on climate. 4 years ago, we decided towards 2025 to double this objective to 50%, and with this, today with our geopolitical background, we already reached this target. We are investing more than 50% for projects with a positive impact on climate, and in France, I'm happy to highlight it, we are more above 70%. And the first pillar of our new strategy, the Climate Bank roadmap, is to clarify and to check that none of the projects we are supporting could have a negative impact on climate. And it's important to mention it, because at the lowest, it's a zero carbon emission, and we won't support any project with a negative impact on climate. With all this strategy, with this new strategy, we are trying to focus on the objective of the European Union to decarbonize our industry, to invest into innovation, and that's why also we are here to support enterprises, and we are loan officer here in this forum today with ChangeNOW to support innovation, because we are sure that innovation will also bring solution towards climate change.
Great, thank you so much. And I think it's very important, the decision-making part, to say that now we are calling ourselves a climate bank, and all our decisions are based on that, because also COVID-19, I think, let us understand very clearly how connected that we are, and we do not have to wait last minute to make a decision, but we have to see things more in the long term, make decisions based on that. And also, as you said, that decarbonization of portfolio is also very important, without putting more burden into the citizens. Because with the inflation that Europe faced this year, everybody's like, okay, what the politicians are doing, they want more money for us to invest in green technologies. But no, it's how to create more systems in a way that benefits the whole community of people, without creating more burden, but creating more opportunities for innovation. Cool. I would like then to go a little bit more pessimistic, let's say, and go to see what are the main obstacles, in your opinion, that we are facing at the moment to ensure a fair, responsible, and sustainable energy transition nowadays. Lucy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think maybe one of the kind of main challenges is we talk about the energy transition, but in reality, we're not talking about a single transition. It's a series of local transitions. I think Anita had used the word tailored, I think, in your keynote. And so these transitions really need to kind of leverage local competencies and local characteristics, but also country-specific challenges. So, for instance, if we look at developing countries, there's a need to balance access to sustainable energy, but they also have their own pursuits of economic growth and energy security. And there's a necessity to balance those two things. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. I think the other thing, something else that I'd maybe just highlight, and in fact, I'm just looking at some words from Fatih Birol just this morning. In fact, so he heads up the International Energy Agency. So he spoke this morning about how solar power investment is set to outstrip spending on oil production this year for the first time, and I think we knew this was likely. We knew this was the trajectory. So this is very promising. But he does highlight a key challenge here, which is that which is whether or not emerging economies will be able to finance their clean energy transition alone. And I think this is really important, and this sort of links back to Grégoire's comments as well. So I think we need to kind of recognize when we talk about the energy transition, we are talking about a series of local tailored transitions. And we're talking about countries that have very different circumstances, very different financial capabilities.
There are many key challenges. First of all, I would say the transition has to be just. And that's why we are trying to develop more than a slogan, no one behind. And it's important to help people, countries that are far beyond the energy mix that, for instance, in France we have. That's why we are investing in emerging countries a lot, and particularly in Africa, because Africa is suffering the more from the transition for the climate change, whereas they are emitting the less. So we are trying to invest for energy, renewable energy for all, transport facilities, and this is important. But within the EU, there are also divergences between countries, and that's why we are also investing more at the east of Europe, for instance, to help Poland, for instance, to speed up the transition. And the time will be important. When we deliver, when we commit ourselves towards an enterprise or any project we are supporting, we are asking the counterpart to be aligned to get a transition strategy aligned with the EU objective, the Fit for 55, and then the neutral carbon emission in 2050. And the question of the timeline and the capacity to invest a lot with a short time period is very important, and I think it's a very high challenge to be able to implement this strategy everywhere in Europe and outside the EU.
As you describe it, I feel that it's somehow an orchestra, like that we have the whole, let's say the concert is the energy transition, and then we have different musical instruments that each one of them need to know their part, they need to know where to enter, what to play, how to do it to have the exact result that we want. So that means that we need a lot of collaboration. We need a lot of discussion and communication. So I wanted to ask you basically how we can make it, how do we need to work together to make this concert, let's say, sound nice?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess what you're alluding to is really strong public and private collaboration. So we need a lot of investment for this transition to happen. Some of that investment may come from the public sector, but a lot of it will need to come from private finance. You know, I often talk about this point that investors don't like uncertainty. So I think that the government really has a role to play. It doesn't really matter which government we're talking about here, but in providing very clear policy direction. Maybe you can use an example of heat pumps. I think there are nearly 4 million heat pumps deployed in France, and I know that's accelerating rapidly. That's unmatched really elsewhere in Europe. That's a fantastic achievement. We are nowhere near that stage in the UK. Yet, if you look at the research, there's now more than 40 independent pieces of research which have concluded that hydrogen at best will play a niche role in home heating in the UK. Yet we're still having a debate in the UK about hydrogen for home heating, even though there are 40 independent studies saying that it's not going to play a core role. And the fact that this debate is happening is really slowing up the adoption of heat pumps. So I think having a really clear kind of policy direction from the public sector can help to really accelerate and crowd in that funding and that innovation from the private sector. So that's the first point I'd make. And the second really, I think, is about skills. I think the energy transition has the potential to create thousands of new green jobs and high-value green jobs. But we need to recognize that we're not going to have those skilled people overnight. We need to invest in training, And we need to look at maybe the jobs that will become less relevant as we go through this transition. And we should be starting to invest in and train those people. So again, I think that's one area where greater, I guess, a kind of pact between public and private and some real concerted effort to support that reskilling and to support those jobs to emerge could make a real difference.
You mentioned in the preamble 2 words, commitment and mobilization. And I think it's important for all the key players to be part of the transition. And we will assume our role, for sure, our responsibility, but we need to work with the enterprises that are polluting the more. And we need for them to switch, to modify, and to decarbonize. It's important. We need to support innovation with different tools. For instance, we need capital risker for investing in seed, in early stage enterprises, because the innovation and solution will probably appear from this kind of enterprises. We need to speed up and to accelerate with small cap and so on, for them to increase the capacity to deliver. And at each level, we need to combine the different resources. Grant, important, and there are some grants in France, for instance. Lending, capital risker, guarantee. We need to combine the resources and to make the project happen and to transform the objective into action. And I think this is the most important thing.
I think it's very important, and both highlighted the commitment part. And we were seeing climate crisis, we were talking about climate change from the 80s, but we were seeing that it's happening in the new generation, it happens sometime later. But now it's like, oh, this is the time that we actually have to take a decision. It's very nice that we have talked about it, but then we need to say yes to this. We need to say, okay, let's do it, and let's go with that. We have this target, we need to put the people, the knowledge. As you mentioned, like, we know that hydrogen power, it's leading the way, but then we are not sure. Are we doing it? Are we not? And as our time is almost finishing, I would like to hear, maybe in 1 minute, what is the main key message that you would like to share with the audience here today? How they can leave your panel, with what kind of thoughts?
There are just so many. It's always hard when people ask. When I speak at things, I say there's no silver bullet. We need to do so many different things in combination. No, I think from my point of view, as I said at the start, a lot of our research is focused on consumers and households, and I think I would really want to emphasize that actually everything you do can make a difference. I know sometimes people think, well, I'm such a small part of a big system, how could this possibly, how could my actions or behaviors possibly be relevant? Some of the research we've done has looked at impacts at scale from thousands of households, and they are not insignificant. They are really enormous, and they could potentially save a lot of costs in the system in terms of not having to build new grid networks, not having to reinforce the energy networks. That would perhaps be what I'd say.
Thank you.
In a nutshell, let's keep in mind that the Paris Agreement was more than 8 years ago. And our trajectory is not so good, actually. So we need probably to speed up with all the actors, including researchers, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and financiers, to be focused on this objective and to be able to implement and to deliver. And I think we have no choice. Please keep in mind that there is no plan B. Remember the slogan 10 years ago. This is true, this is still the case. And we need, with all responsibility, different angles, we need to act and to transform it into really action and to speed up.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your insights in this great panel. I think we got a lot of knowledge of what we have to do, how we have to do, with whom we have to do, and when. And I think the time is changed now, right? Thank you very much.